All right, here we go. Today we're gonna talk about some material in the third chapter here, which is eventually going to lead us into this second reaction paper. We're really going to be asking this question: what is the difference between religion and philosophy? I mean, the two sort of merge together as we're going to find it, because we're gonna question Jesus a little bit here, or ask you to think about the role of Jesus in history a little bit. Okay, so coming up, I want to remind you real quick that in the last chapter we Greek philosophy, and the Greek philosophy was more concerned with these deeper questions. So what is the meaning of life, and what is the origin of the universe, or the stuff of the universe, or stuff. If you look at some of the stuff we didn't talk about, some of the earliest philosophers were the cosmologists, who were interested in, like I said, what is the universe composed of? Well, along comes a time in history when the Romans started to perhaps take control of the world, and the Romans were much more orderly. They were much more concerned with getting the job done. They didn't know waste time with some nonsense philosophy. They need things to be bang, okay? And so along came a bunch of philosophy that was really oriented not towards these bigger, deeper questions like, oh, what is the world composed of? But instead, it was oriented more towards something much more practical. So how should I live? What is the correct way to live my life? Okay. And so coming in this, we have a group of philosophers, and I'm just going to very briefly brush on them because there's quite a few, but I'm going to brush on the main topics here. The first group of philosophers that were, again, in the Roman world and were more oriented toward practical measures would be the skeptics, and the skeptics were they didn't think that there was any truth. Okay, that there is no way to know truth. There's no way to prove anything false. I mean, what's the point? They said. Okay, it's better not to believe in anything. It's not a particularly effective philosophy to live by. However, skepticism is, of course, one of the important points. In fact, at some point, if we ever talk about what makes a good scientist, and a healthy dose of skepticism is incredibly important in the role of science. So it's not like a dead idea, but I can't imagine my life being dominated by such a philosophy. Second philosophy here, very briefly, is cynicism. And cynicism, they believed that the best way to live was on your own or away from society. I mean, again, we're going to come up with some other philosophers later. They're going to come have similar ideas. I believe it was the Romanticists. But basically, they said, look, human beings are good. They're just naturally good. All right? And what happens is they get perverted when they interact with society. It's society that makes them evil. All of the worst things in us, things such as anger and envy and things of this nature, they can only exist if other people are present. Okay? It is the presence of other people that brings out the worst in us, and that without these other people, say the cynics, and so the cynics were believed that the right way to live was, at one with nature. True happiness depends on self-sufficiency, they said, and there's something to that too. Okay. The Epicureans, founded by, of course, Epicurus, the Epicureans believed that the best life was one where you got long-term pleasure from moderation. That is, they said that every every very great thing is almost always followed by something very difficult. Like if you go out and, oh, I got a new television, yeah, and it's followed by a credit card bill. I go out and I'm like really fun and drunk at a party, woohoo! And it's followed by a hangover. Okay, and so every massively large good thing followed by a bad thing. Okay, so they said the best way to live is one of moderation, and that's where pleasure comes from, is long-term moderation. Okay, and it's quite an interesting thing. They said in this world, just enjoy it. Uh, don't ever go to the extreme, because extreme highs are followed by extreme lows. The Stoics now, the Stoics believed in the that what we, basically they said you should just accept it. And I mean, they were a little extreme. They felt that like the perfect culmination of a life, it would be a death faced with courage. Okay, that you just accept your fate. You have to die, but you don't have to die screaming. Okay, just accept it and then go with it. Okay, and so it's kind of an interesting thing. And I mean, none of these are dead philosophies, but none of these philosophies led to major Western thinking. Though I mean, we have bits and pieces of these in every one of our in our science to this day. Okay, another little bit weirder type of philosophy was Neoplatonism. I mean, this is a word that modern thinkers have come up with, but the point is, even after Plato's death, his philosophies were still well studied and well talked about, and they were taught at the universities of the day. So Plato did not die when Plato died, right? Plato's philosophy lived on. And so what we find is that his mystical elements, in fact, as it says right here, the philosophy that emphasized the most mystical elements of Plato's philosophy, transcendental experiences were considered the most significant type of human experience. And so all of a sudden, in this kind of this day and age, this Roman period, and much practical, what's the right way to live, and along comes this person named Jesus. All right, and Jesus comes along and he's a teacher, the great teacher who comes out and says, hey, the right way to live is, and he teaches us the way to live. Okay, just like the Stoics did, just like the Cynics did, just like the Skeptics. He has different, definitely has different answers, but still it's ultimately the same question: what is the right way to live? Okay, and so what we find is that Jesus was not a philosopher per se. He says he's just a teacher. And in fact, even more, he doesn't even call himself a teacher necessarily. He refers to himself almost as a messenger. He's just sort of passing along the information that's given to him. Okay? And so according to Jesus, right, knowledge of good and evil is revealed by God. And once you know this knowledge which God gives you is what's supposed to guide. So the question of how am I supposed to live? Well, God will tell you what's good, God will tell you what's evil, and now you know how you're supposed to live. Okay? Well, Jesus himself was not a philosopher per se. It was really St. Paul that really took his work and expanded upon it, right? And really got it out there. Got it out there is really what I mean. And so we know very briefly that Saul, I mean, up until the time of, very briefly, during Jesus' lifetime, Jesus and his followers were still Jewish. Okay, they were perhaps a sect of Judaism or something like that, but they were definitely Jewish. Okay, now Saul was a Roman whose job was to persecute the Christians rather, to persecute the Christians, and he, as the story is told, he's on the road to Damascus, and he sees an angel, comes to him and tells him a vision, and it strikes him blind. He converts to Paul, and at this moment, Christianity is born as a separate religion. Okay, so this moment on the road to Damascus is perhaps the origins of Christianity as a separate religion rather than a branch of Judaism. Okay? So here's how St. Paul presents the Christianity. Faith needs to be used above reason. So you have reason, sure, but faith needs to be accepted more. See, according to him, the good life is achieved when we surrender our existence to God's will. Don't use any of your rationality, just accept it. Just accept what you've got and just go with it, okay? What's the right way to live? The right way to live is just surrender yourself to God, okay? Humans are caught in an eternal struggle. This is kind of cute. Humans are animals which possess a spark of God. We're partly animalistic and partly divine, I believe it says under my face here. I don't know. And so conflict is the inevitable result. Okay? And so this is an interesting thing. We're partly animalistic and partly divine, and conflict is the result. I don't know. Are we again seeing id versus superego? Because it most certainly sounds like an id versus superego statement right there. And so here's some of the questions that come about as a result of the rise of Christianity. Okay, so if God is all powerful and your goal is to surrender your will to God, is there room for free will? Does the human being have free will if God is all powerful? And if faith is all that we really need, why do you have human reason? Why does rationality even exist if there's no point, according to St. Paul? Okay. Why do we even have these things? If God is perfect, yeah, etc. Okay. But under St. Paul, as I said, Paul makes the Christianity into a separate religion, having a separate existence from Judaism. But we find that it was just one of many. In the Roman Empire, as I said, the Romans were very practical. They wanted to get a job done. So what you find is that throughout the Roman Empire, as the Romans would occupy and conquer new people, they would just sort of bring in their religion, and they just accepted every religion, okay? And it wasn't because they believed it necessarily, but because it was convenient politically. And so we find that, as some interesting little side notes, say, for example, the different days of the week. One of my favorites is Tuesday. Well, Tuesday, Tu was a name of a god in the Germania, in Germany, in the conquered peoples of Germany, T-E-W, this god. And so they named Tuesday as a way to to integrate the people in Germania into the Roman Empire and to make them feel as though they belonged, okay? And there's so many examples of this throughout the history that the Romans, they just grabbed everybody. They just threw them all in. Well, Emperor Constantine, one of the later Roman emperors, I believe this is after the split between Eastern and Western Roman Empire. I believe Constantine was the Eastern Roman Empire in Byzantium, I believe. But anyway, he has a vision, and I mean, this is a story. Of course, he's going out to battle. It's the night before a major battle, and he is really outnumbered. It's like 5-1. He's outnumbered. He's going to get his ass kicked, and he sleeps and he sees a vision. He has a vision of the cross, a Christian cross in the sky, burning cross in the sky. And he's like, oh my gosh. So when he wakes up, he instructs all of his soldiers, now, I want you to paint that on your shields, okay? And they go into battle with the cross painted onto their shields, and they win. I mean, they dominate in a battle that they should have just lost miserably. And after this, Constantine accepts Christianity and converts. Well, the fact is, Constantine had like 9 wives, and one of his favorite wives was a Christian, and she pressured him, and I think maybe Constantine didn't want to admit that he was being pressured by a woman, but it seems as though one of his wives, and in fact, he didn't even officially convert to Christianity until he was on his deathbed, all right? So anybody tells you otherwise, that's baloney, all right? He did it for political reasons, and I think that he converted to Christianity to hedge his bets at the very end, just in case that would be the thing that would get him into heaven. I don't know, whatever. But anyway, now as the savior of the Christian church, it's under Constantine, by the way, that the Christianity begins to spread. It is an accepted religion within the Roman Empire. It's no longer necessarily a persecuted religion. And what we find is that there was a lot of different sects of Christianity at this time. Perhaps you guys can remember back to something like the Dead Sea Scrolls or something. And the Dead Sea Scrolls seems to have been some religious texts that were used by one group of Christians, a church of Christians, what do I know? A group of Christians and that was their part of their, well, at that point all these different groups of Christians had different ideas and different thoughts and different, I mean, they were all based on Jesus, they were all based on some of this stuff. But what happened is Emperor Constantine said, okay, this just isn't right. If we're going to have a religion, we got to have one guiding, one set of rules behind it. So he convenes a Nicene Council, and he brings together these most important people. And of course, what happens is the people that he brings in are the rich dudes, right? Because I mean, they're the most important ones, right? And so they come in and they work together. It was a big deal. It was like a 5-year deal. I don't know. It was really quite large. And they come together and they come up with a few things. They concluded that God the Father and Jesus the Son are equal. Okay, they are the same. Before this, they didn't know what was the relationship between God and Jesus. What is the connection? They created a single set of documents, okay? We now call it the New Testament, all right? The New Testament didn't exist before this. Before this, there was all kinds of different texts, all kinds of different documents, some of which were accepted by some groups, some of which weren't, okay? And it was at this point that they decided that they would have just one, okay? So it gave a little bit of legitimacy to Christianity. So once Christianity became this thing, then the question was, what about other philosophies and other religions? Are we going to accept them? St. Jerome argued that non-Christian philosophy, out. St. Ambrose argued that elements of other philosophers, that if you could make them compatible with Christianity, then why not accept them, right? You don't have to just throw them out just because they're not exactly the same thing. Sounds like a conservative versus a liberal to me, but look at that. They're both saints. But then St. Augustine came along, and he had it, all right? He said, okay, Christianity is spirituality. All we know in the world is that God put it there. All right, you don't need to study it. You don't need to know it. You just got to know that God put it there. That's it. All right? You don't need anything else. The only reason you exist is to have a connection and a union with God. There is no other reason for your existence, okay? Oh my goodness, that would really make your life difficult. And so what we find is through the Dark Ages, the Catholic Church in particular, the Christian Church, became all-powerful. I mean, so powerful politically and otherwise, economically and politically, there was just no comparing them. And so church doctrine became just unchallengeable. You just don't do that. You challenge the church, you die. I mean, it was very simple. As we say here, there are two types of people, believers and heretics, and that's it. Not believers and non-believers, but believers and heretics, that's it. And see, what happens, though, is this, that during the sack of Rome, as Rome was sort of collapsing, most of the ancient knowledge disappeared, okay? As the invaders from the north came in and sacked Rome and the Roman Empire, they were willy-nilly. They were just slashing and burning. They didn't care. Well, it turned out that some of the philosophers grabbed some stuff and ran out, let me see, what am I trying to say? Ran out east with them, all right? They went hiding in with them. In other words, they took them into the desert. They took them into the Middle East, okay? And lo and behold, these Arab philosophers grabbed these things and put them into the Arabic universities. And so if you would have asked somebody in about the year 800 about Aristotle, they would have said, Era who now? What are you talking about? They would not have known the name Aristotle, Socrates, Plato. These names would not have been known, even to the intellectuals in the year 800 or 900. They would not have known him, okay? They were gone. Well, during the Crusades, of course, the Europeans went over to the Middle East to, reclaim the Holy Land. And while they're there, you know what else they found? The ancient philosophy. Holy crap, look what they found, right? All the ancient philosophy was in the libraries, in particular Aristotle's writing, and they loved Aristotle. They brought Aristotle back home, and we're going to talk about Aristotle a good bit in the next slideshow as we talk about the discovery of Aristotle and how awesome it is, and also the discovery that what Aristotle had to say does not always mesh with what the Christian Bible has to say, all right? So, what do we have here? We got the Dark Ages, okay? And what was the zeitgeist? In the zeitgeist was that Christianity was dominant, and there is just all it is your life equals the church, okay? It's at this point, the church is all in Latin. If you're an average citizen born at this time, you will, let's see, own no property. You will have no hope in your life. You will have a religion which is shoved on you so heavily that, I mean, you must believe it. But the service is in Latin and you don't understand it. The Bible is written in some God only knows language, which you couldn't read even if you could get a copy of, but you can't even get a copy of because the nearest copy is probably 500 miles away at some monastery. Okay? You've got nothing. Your life is shit. All right? You don't exist except as a number on a page, which is supporting the economy of some rich landowner. Okay? You have no life. All right, we're going to come back and continue on to this in perhaps a more positive light as we talk about humanism in the next presentation. But before I leave this one, I want to go back to the reaction paper briefly. Now, how are religion and philosophy the same and different? And I wanted to point out that, I mean, the theme here was this, that religion and philosophy, both Christianity and then the Roman philosophy, both were answering the same question. So how am I supposed to live? What's the right way to live? So the question is, for you, is religion and philosophy the same thing, or is there a difference between these two? Later on, some are even going to say that science is a religion. So I want you to answer this question. I mean, what is the difference between religion and philosophy? And so the second question here is very related. Just like the skeptics, cynics, Epicureans, and Stoics, the teaching of Jesus of Nazareth seemed to be intended to show us the right way to live. Okay? So all of a sudden, by just putting Jesus, okay, you've got, the skeptics and the cynics and the Epicureans and the Stoics and Jesus. He's just 1 out of 5. Have we diminished Jesus? Is Jesus somehow special and different? Is he perhaps special because more people follow him? Because is it because Constantine decided that he'd grab Christianity instead of Epicureanism? If Constantine had said, "Hey, Epicureanism is awesome. It's my new state philosophy," would Epicurus have the same influence that Jesus does today? Or is Jesus something different? All right, is Jesus clearly different from these other 4 philosophies, or is he just one of these philosophers that tells us the right way to live? Okay, so we'll come back, as I said, we'll come back next time, and we'll start with this same slide right here, and we'll talk about the zeitgeist in the Dark Ages of Europe and how the humanism is going to begin to arise, and I will see you the next time.